Welcome back to Law and Crime, everybody. I'm Jesse Weber, and we are live right now in the Rosenbaum and Rosenbaum trial. Jennifer and Joseph Rosenbaum are these foster parents, or former foster parents, I should say, who are accused of abusing two girls that were in their care. One of those girls is Millie. Now, that's what we're talking about right now. On the stand right now is Crystal Bale. She's a nurse practitioner who did a full-body examination of Millie. Now, Millie's sister, Layla, was 2 years old and was found dead. The question, of course, is did she die from an accidental choking incident or did she die from abuse? Right now, let's see what some injuries were sustained by Millie. We believe that's where the prosecution's going right now. Okay, we are talking about graphic images, graphic bruises right now of a 4-year-old girl. But this is a continuation of what we've heard a lot throughout this case. What's your reaction to listening to her?
Well, this is a great witness for the state because, first of all, the jury's going to believe her. She did very well up there. She was very careful, very considered in her testimony. And also she lays out this history of injuries all over Millie that are really inconsistent with just some sort of an accidental fall. The flip side of that, the cross from the defense, of course, was focused on the limited maybe aspect as it pertained to causation and how these happened. I mean, of course, the jury's going to be able to infer that. But, you know, the defense tactic that if it's not there in your notes, then it doesn't exist, which is what was done also with the investigator. So, you know, I think they're trying to compile this attack on really the credibility, the theory of the state that links the defendants to what happened. You know,
look, the defense is trying to say this is caused by an accident, this is caused by gymnastics. There was a theory, well, Layla maybe hurt herself in gymnastics, even though it was shown she was never even enrolled in the gymnastics class, so wouldn't it seem that Jennifer Rosenbaum is lying? There was another question, well, then maybe she was just playing with Millie when Millie was at gymnastics. Look, the point is, Judge, and I want your perspective on this, is we're listening to these different injuries. Is it beneficial for this jury to consist of parents? Because maybe the defense can say, hey, listen, guys, you have kids. You remember when they would run around. You remember when they were doing physical activities. They'd get all sorts of bruises, maybe at especially a young age like these girls. So is it beneficial to have parents on the stand who may react to this, relate to this?
On the jury. So here's the issue with that. Yes, if they're good parents, but if they're not good parents in and of themselves, then it may not be beneficial. So that's kind of a risky. You just don't know for sure. Keep this in mind, though, Jesse, and I think parents who are on the jury will know, even if all of these the 2 lacerations and the 15 bruises on this 4-year-old, even if those were not willfully inflicted by the defendants, I would argue it's neglect, lack of supervision, and I think if you have parents on the jury, they may feel the same.
That is a great point. I mean, that is a whole other category, and again, we're waiting to see the conclusion of the case, which I think it's going to still last a couple more weeks, but probably in those jury instructions, that might be one of the things that this jury could consider. If you don't think it's murder, if you don't even think it's abuse, maybe it is neglect. Let's go back live. A new witness is on the stand right now for the state, and we'll see what role she plays in this really disturbing case out of Georgia. Okay, now the DFCS, Bob, has come under fire through this case. It's almost like they've been on trial. Now, she is a foster care investigator, obviously tasked with something went wrong here. What went wrong with the DFCS? Because we heard from people who testified that there were warning signs and they didn't take these girls out of the care of the Rosenbaums.
Well, the question for the jury is really going to be, okay, fine, so let's indict the system. Let's say they fell short. If they had done their job, maybe this girl would be alive, but it still doesn't change how they're going to view whether the defendants should be punished for being the ones who committed the crime. But I think that this witness is certainly going to have the jury maybe rolling their eyes like, you know, you guys should have been doing more here. So her credibility, not really her credibility, but the system's credibility may be a little suspect when she comes in to talk to them. But obviously, she's only there to really say what she observed in that room when she went in there.
Well, Judge, let me ask you this. You know, we heard from Samantha White, we heard from Tamara Warner-Smith, who were both let go for their role in this horrible, horrible situation. Couldn't the jury look at that and says, well, if the DFCS investigated this and felt that these women should have done more and they obviously did not, then doesn't that kind of strike against the defendants? And then the jury's ultimately convicting the defendants because of the decision of the DFCS. Is that right? Is that proper?
You know, I don't know that that's going to happen. I agree with Bob. I think they're two very separate issues. And I think the jury is sophisticated enough to recognize they're two different issues. One, could this death have been prevented if DFACS had done everything correctly? Yes, let's be honest. But number two, irregardless of anything that DFACS did these defendants cause these injuries beyond a reasonable doubt? And so I do think they're two issues that a jury can probably distinguish.
Yeah, and right now she's going over, you know, that she was present for Millie's exam and seeing these marks and bruises. It's very horrifying to hear. We're going to take a break. When we come back, we plan to jump back live. Stay tuned. Okay, so now we're hearing some more of this cross-examination. Bob, what is the defense trying to get at here? Because under direct, she talked about this incredible story from Jennifer Rosenbaum about how she tried to resuscitate Layla. She talked about the bruises. She talked about her role in investigating the role of the DFCS. So where's the defense trying to go right now?
Well, I think the defense is trying to emphasize the good things that this witness said about their client in the context that there was nothing there about her harming the child. There was everything there about her trying to save the child. Obviously, the negative was that she saw a lot of bruises, but that's a double-edged sword here. The state has to put her in to fill out the landscape here. And obviously, the jurors may say, oh, the agency that may be partially at fault for this, and maybe she's out there to cover the agency's back. But I think that, you know, a lot of the statements she focused on were from the child, from the mother, and
right.
And those things all sort of indicate that this was just a tragedy.
You know, Judge, this case is in your backyard. It's in Georgia. You know a lot about how these things are investigated. What should we be thinking about in terms of the investigation into this matter?
Testifying is with the Special Investigation Unit of State DFACS. So the good news was the state DFACS office, which is separate and apart from the county DFACS office, got involved from the get-go, which is good. That's another layer. That's oversight. Of course, that was after the child was already deceased, but there's a sibling. So that helps with the investigation and protection of the sibling. So those are all positive things as an outcome. Let me just say this, too, about the defense in this case. It's fascinating to me. I think they're doing a really effective job at the slow and steady, because in an investigation involving especially a death of a child, but anytime you have to interview a minor child, it should not be repeated. That child should not have to go through the trauma of being asked over and over, and likely they're going to change their answers the more they're asked. And so the defense is bringing out, but the medical examiner asked multiple questions, even though we know that the empirical data suggests that should not occur. You should not ask the child about what happened over and over.
Yeah, and look, we're getting a good sense of exactly how this all happened, but we're also seeing things that we never saw before, let alone a 7-year-old taking the stand, her being questioned in this manner about abuse and what happened to her sister. So we are getting a good insight into perhaps how the foster care system and Division of Family and Children's Services works. Unfortunately, the result is not what any of us wanted. So we're going to take a quick break. When we come back, we have a lot more to cover. Another medical professional, Bob, that comes on the stand and talks about these injuries that just don't seem consistent with somebody who would choke or somebody who would have minor accidents from being a child and running around, or even resuscitation efforts gone bad. It's a disturbing thing to hear. What did you make of that testimony?
I think it's just what you said. The most important statement that this doctor gave, I thought, was he's treated 100,000 patients in the ER, and this was by far the worst he had seen. So it takes the argument away that the parents are urging here, is that, you know, kids fall, they get hurt.
Right.
We were also aggressively trying to save this child's life, which may explain some of the injuries, but not all of these. So I think this doctor, who's a little bit of a cowboy in his appearance, you know, on the stand, but nonetheless, the substance of what he said, I think, was important for the state's purposes to show that this is not, this is very unusual.
Now, Judge, let me ask you this. We have two defendants here. They're both being represented by the same attorney. They're going at it together, saying they both never abused this girl. This was an accident. She choked on chicken. We tried to do everything we could. You hear more about Jennifer Rosenbaum's role in the abuse. You don't hear so much about Joseph's role. I'm curious that dynamic between the two defendants. What's your thoughts on that?
So my thought is, based on the testimony and what I know about the case, is, listen, I think they would agree and admit he was not home at the time this incident with the chicken or alleged chicken occurred. And he wasn't home during other times. She was with the kids. He was at work. So quite frankly, I've said since the beginning, I'm a little surprised that they have the same attorney, because they were not home at the same times with the children. And again, I think the time frame and chronological time frames is very important in this case.
And I'm glad you mentioned that, because Sergeant Dwayne Harrison, who's from the Henry County Police Department, when he had an opportunity to interview Jennifer, this is what she said about what happened to Layla, and also, where was Joseph? Watch. Bob, is that how you dislodge a piece of chicken? Is that how you try to do CPR efforts?
In the CPR courses that I've had, no. No one's ever told us to use a butter knife. But again, you know, it's a question of, did this really happen this way? And if someone was panicked and didn't know what to do, because these situations can also be something where everybody gets panicked and they're trying to do good, but sometimes they do harm. And that's where training comes in, and she obviously didn't have training here. But again, this witness was focused on her, not the husband, as you pointed out before. I think with respect to him, this whole pattern of abuse is what's going to be important, in that even if he didn't participate in it, he knew it, and he did nothing to stop it.
Right. They're not saying this is an isolated incident. Judge, I mean, what's your perspective? Is there reasonable doubt here? Because at the end of the day, as we always said, there's no eyewitness to really what happened to Layla. Even her sister was not in the room when this happened. Sad as it is to say, she was a 4-year-old girl who walked in and sees that her sister is unresponsive. So the fact that we do not have this eyewitness and we have this account, and is it possible, we've heard from medical professionals who said, even if you perform CPR the incorrect way, the injury sustained by this young girl, it doesn't match up. What's your thought?
I think that if you can narrow the time frame of when these injuries occurred, because you remember you've got multiple injuries on both of these children, and narrow down that time frame to they were in the care and control of these two defendants, I think that will eliminate a lot of arguments for reasonable doubt.
And let's not forget, the cause of death is blunt force trauma to the abdomen that resulted in a transected pancreas. That is a huge amount of force based upon our understanding from the medical testimony. It's time to take a break. When we come back, more to cover.